Welcome to our Living Stones podcast, where we gather to discuss all matters of faith and life as members of God's household. In a world that often leaves us feeling fragmented and disconnected, our hope is that Living Stones will help to further connect us as we pursue the Lord together. I'm your host, Siyoung, and in today's podcast, we'll be discussing the topic of travel sports and Sunday worship. And joining me today are Pastor Paul and one of our ruling elders, Wooj. Welcome, guys.
Yeah, hello. Good to be
Welcome
here.
back.
It's been a while.
Yeah. It's been a year for you at least, Wooj?
Yes, I haven't been back in a long time, and I can see the podcast ministry has flourished.
It's evolving
yeah, I
and
know.
upgrading every time we come
This
here.
production is awesome.
So, as I introduced in the beginning, we're talking about travel sports. And before we get into, why we're talking about it in the first place, can one of you guys explain what is travel sports? Like, what is this thing and how does it work?
Me? I think you should.
I could chime in, but you can just start us off.
What is travel sports?
Yeah, for like those of us who might not be aware.
Well, I think it runs a spectrum, but essentially it's youth sports, anywhere from the rec level to a almost professionalized level. I guess it's called different things depending on the sport. Club level, travel level, and usually there's a hefty fee involved. Because there is more professionalized coaching, and you're being inputted into a certain like level of competition in a league, and so I think that's what we're assuming here. And here in America, needless to say, it's fairly robust, and I think the trend has been that it's grown. Even if you think about the culture of our children and how they're raised, you know, it's we're in a day and age where children's lives are slightly more sheltered in a sense, in the sense that at least when I grew up, I was kind of out and about in the neighborhood amongst the community and amongst my community friends. I think nowadays it's our children's lives are slightly more curated, and I think youth sports is a huge part of that. So it becomes their community, maybe even their predominant community. And one more thing I'll add is there's quite a bit of parental involvement, and that differs from at least when I grew up playing rec sports.
Right.
Because because it's a more professionalized system, you have to have, it's imperative to have actually the parental involvement, whether it's them driving or the financial commitment. So maybe that's a starting point, Pastor Paul. I don't know.
Yeah, I think Elder Wooj is more familiar with how the soccer teams are run in the area. Is that correct? I'm more of the baseball world, and travel sports is very popular for baseball families because it simply offers better competition. It gives the kids an edge, especially if they want to progress more of a rapid pace and get to that next level of competition. Rec ball right now, also known as house ball or just plain little league, it has gotten weaker over the years. You'll have a wide range of talent, and some kids honestly are really bad. And so the common sentiment is, do I really have to invest my time, money, and energy when the competition is so low? And so where I'm at in Centerville, Clifton area, SYA, they require all travel kids to play in the house or the rec ball teams during the spring. That's why springtime is so busy for me, because we're doing both house and travel. So we're doubling up. And so SYA, what they do is they place priority on house ball so that the little league system doesn't get compromised. And they're basically saying the travel kids, if you don't play house ball, then we will not put you on our all-star and postseason teams. That kind of feeds into the whole little league, playoffs and world, what you see on ESPN, eventually. And so that's what motivates them to do both during the spring. So it is unfortunate though how over time Little League has weakened, and there are so many, especially in this area, there's so many options, like so many travel teams to choose from, and even that ranges from like they call AA, lowest level, to AAA to Metro level, and so there's a range there as well. So that's just how it is currently. Yeah, lot of money. It's definitely a growing industry. I wouldn't necessarily say that you get the kind of coaching that you expect to get based on the money you pay. So a lot of money is wasted, I think. Yeah. But anyway, we'll maybe talk about it later.
There's a difference between rec league and and travel sports league.
And mainly the difference you'll see is in the competition level of play. Yeah.
And in this travel sports league, it's called travel sports because I'm assuming you are literally traveling to different places. And how far did it take
I mean,
you?
the cheaper teams, they'll just focus on local tournaments or just playing within the local, I don't know, the region here. So it's less expensive. But if you want to pay more, then you have to pay not just the team fees, but the hotel fees, right? And the food, all that's involved in traveling long distances. So it adds up.
So it brings you out of like Nova into other
For sure.
regions.
If you just could logically think about it, think about the talent pool. You can have a house league or a rec league locally in your county because anyone can play, right? And there's a wide variety. Then you move up maybe a level, and then you have kind of the cream of the crop of that level rising, and you might have a regional area. But when you get to that elite level, it's the best of, say, Fairfax County or the best of Prince William County, and there's a couple teams that kind of represent that county, and so you have to play cross state even.
I see.
So I would say it's fair, I think, for the most part, to think that the higher you get on the travel program, you travel more. This is a generalization, but
Yeah.
Okay. And it sounds like you guys have personal experience. Wooj said soccer and Pastor Paul, you said baseball. So what are your personal experiences with travel sports if your kids have been involved in it?
Yeah, so my oldest he's about to be 17 now. Just took the SATs yesterday. So
17?
yeah, I know.
Wow. My goodness.
Yeah, he'll be a senior next year. So most of my reflections on travel sport as a parent would be Jordan. Even Kaylin, she did a little bit of gymnastics, and then I have a youngest son, 11, Cameron, who actually enjoys sports way more than his brother does. But Jordan was a one sport athlete. Like, he committed to soccer early, and like most sports, most parents, we just exposed him to soccer just because he was short, but then he was quick, and he did well in the rec program. And so by year 2, like, they were forming like these rec all-star teams, and then the parents all want to play together. So then they start playing together and they dominate. And then what happened for us was really early, in retrospect, too early in my opinion, but I think he was 8 years old or so, no later than 9. That whole all-star team wanted to go travel that year. And so you're left with kind of what Pastor Paul says. You either go back down to rec, where it's not going to be a great experience, right? At least from a perspective of competition, right? If you use that as the barometer, or you go with them. They wanted to create a team on their own that was more commitment that Mina and I was willing to make, not just financially, but also primarily it was Sundays, right? So we found another local one that had Saturday games, and so he started. I will never forget that first day he tried out. It was like pouring rain. To be honest, he was going to make it no matter what, right? But the coach wanted to see that Jordan was tough enough to like not complain about playing in the rain. And I still have this image of like tiny little just running around. And I guess, maybe I'll get into it, but like that would be the start of like travel journey with Jordan, Mina, and I. And so he played club soccer for a long time till sophomore year in high school. Played JV, and actually, he decided to stop playing at that point. The decision I left up to him. I could talk about it later, but so that's kind of the journey. So mostly, yeah, just travel soccer at varying levels.
Okay. How about you, Pastor Paul?
Caleb, he started, I think it was age 10. So there was a coach that tried to get him on his team earlier. I think SYA, they had a team starting at 8U at the time. We waited a couple years, and by 10U, he wanted to play. Of course, the stress of it all is the fact that they play on Sundays, and so I had to tell the coach prior to each season, hey, my situation, it is my job. I'm a pastor. We can't make Sunday morning games. I mean, even Sunday afternoon games would be tough at times. But I think for me, I'm not sure if we're going to get into it later, but theologically, I was okay with committing to Sunday worship and then freeing the afternoon for any recreational activities. There is still a bit of a tension in my heart, even regarding that, but I think that's how I resolved it during those years, and I still do. He played travel for the most part every year after that, while missing a good chunk of games on Sundays, which was fine. I think the enjoyment that he got out of it was that he was able to play with his friends, and even now on his Centerville High School team, majority of the guys he's playing with, he kind of grew up with on travel teams, right? Building chemistry together. We never went crazy with travel. We stayed local. We stuck with SYA all throughout his Little League years. We did 13. SYA created a 13U team for the first time. It was way back, about 8 years ago now. And so he did that. That was a big transition because they moved from small field to big field, and then he did. I believe he did 14U at a different facility. It was a different team, but all that to say, it was sort of a let's assess after each year on what we should do as a family. I did my best not to force anything. It was left to him. If he wanted to play, keep on playing, and he did. I will say that at some point, for baseball at least, I'm not sure how it was with soccer, but when you hit 15, that's when they call it showcase. It's not just regular travel. It's showcase baseball, which means you are now wanting to really consider seriously college baseball, like being a college athlete, and you're preparing yourself for that. And so that's the whole purpose changes. And so he had to make that decision, and he knew he wanted to stick with it and see how far he can go. And yeah, the more money's involved, more time commitments involved, it becomes more of a job, not just a recreational thing anymore. And so, the nature of it sort of changes as you grow older.
I see.
And sorry, he's starting a little bit earlier than his older brother. He did 8U. He just completed 9U season. He's sticking with the same team. 10U. I'm actually assisting, and I know all the coaches. It's at SYA, and they understand my situation. And so but they in some ways value me because I've been doing this for a while. I'm experienced, and they value, I guess, my input during the practices, even if I miss like a Sunday tournament. As long as I'm there during the practices, and I'm good to go, right?
So you bring enough where they
and
still respect
and
you.
you know what, they also they've done their best to, like, the main coach, he's done his best to accommodate, and so he would deliberately schedule most of the games, like for 9U, most of the games were actually Sunday afternoon. So Joshua didn't miss much.
I see. Okay, I think that's helpful. I mean, my oldest is a 4-year-old, so I have no idea of this travel sports world. And I think we do have a lot of married couples with young children at our church. And I think this is coming to everybody, the reality of travel sports. And so I think it helps to provide some context and understanding of what this exactly is. Now, obviously, we're talking about this for a reason. We're not just here to give an informational session on travel sports, but why is this topic important for our listeners, namely our church? I know you guys alluded to it a little earlier. I know the word Sunday was thrown out a lot, right? And so can you guys kind of elaborate on why we're talking about this in the first place?
Um. Okay. Well, I think we'll probably address this. The most obvious one is that travel sports is a weekend affair,
Mm.
right? So Saturdays and Sundays. And I think most sports that's the case, because no matter what, you're gonna have these tournaments who are generally like
Mm.
weekends. And so the obvious one there is it comes at odds with Sunday service and Sunday attendance and how you think through observation, how you observe as a family the Sabbath, right?
Mm.
Essentially, even if you were to attend church and go to your travel game and things like that, the fact that it is still a Sunday activity, I think it's all to say, it just it meshes there, right? The two worlds collides there. The other thing I would say is the point I was making is I think it's a different generation where travel sports really has grown to be a mega thing in America. It's when we were growing up, our parents, the first generation experiences, like they really wanted us to succeed and get the best for ourselves through academics.
Mhm.
Study hard, we're working hard so that you can have the opportunity to attend a good university and in the hopes of getting a good job. So my point is, you could tell that from I'm generalizing here, the first gen parent was aspiring for their children to succeed. And that definition of success was tied to the route of academics
Mhm.
and hopefully financial success is what I'm getting at.
Mm.
And I would say some parents these days, I think because youth sports is so prominent, so big, if your child is so inclined, I think that's a big allure to want to champion your kid to succeed in that manner. And that's not a bad thing
Mm.
in and of itself, but because travel source is so sports is so prominent, that's there, right? And so I think that's also something that, why the so what is ultimately, I guess what I'm getting at is when, as Christians and as Christian parents, the idea of how we parent and how we disciple our children comes into play along with sports. You
Mm.
can't you can't separate the two,
Mm.
right? Well, it's such a big part of how you raise your children, especially if someone like your child plays from 8 years old to 18 years old. That's 10
Mm.
years of their
Mm.
life. That's
Mm.
more than half of the time they spend under your household and under your roof, and so it becomes a huge theme. So I would say those two things I think about as to why, at least for me, like if I think about why I've had to ponder this and reflect on the last 10 years of Jordan, is like those are the two things that come to mind
Mm.
about the things I've wrestled with.
Mm. Mm.
Um,
How about you, Pastor Paul?
Well, we know most parents with young kids are struggling with this issue. I hope they're struggling. I hope it's not an easy decision for them to choose a travel team and just um, have it take over the entire weekend. Not even their whole weekend. It's more than that because it's a thick culture. Once you immerse yourself in the sports world, especially with your kids involved in it, it becomes an extremely emotional thing.
Mm.
Sports, that culture, and the parents, and I mean, think about the time, the money invested in that whole endeavor. It's incredible, and
Mm.
so that's why they become so close. And I confess, I mean, yeah, I've seen it. I've experienced it myself. I mean, the joy of winning together, grinding it out together week after week, and then accomplishing something like big, competing against the teams you do and achieving success. It's like an emotional thing,
Mm.
and so it does have this power to really take over and control you and your family and your rhythms, weekly, monthly, yearly. And I think that's the danger, right? And not saying that playing sports is a bad thing, obviously, but I think people need to be mindful of, yeah, what Elder Wooj said, the allure of it and the power it has to really uh, become its own religion,
Mm.
right? Because it does have the power to replace your worship,
Mm.
unto God, right? Um, Simple test. I mean, maybe we cover it later, but how much do you spend on travel sports compared to how much do you give to ministry and church, right? I challenge families to compare those numbers really,
Mm.
and compare the time you spend
Mm.
on the field, you know, um, in the versus in the word and worship. I bet you, it's going to be extremely lopsided.
Mm.
Yeah, I think one more thing to chime in. I actually do think it's worthwhile thinking through as a parent who supports a travel athlete exactly what Pastor Paul talked about. Do you recognize where your heart is at when you invest so much both into your child but into this route actually? And the reason why I say that is because I didn't realize that actually, and I have a personal story because Jordan, we had a lot of ups and downs. I don't think Jordan was ever meant to. Yeah, I think I could tell at a certain point. Like I would say, even in soccer, once you hit the 13, 14s, you
Mm.
can tell the final piece is like puberty. And if they become physically elite, then they have a chance to really go elite.
Mm.
But right around then is when it's the divine light. It's not just for recreation. You got to really take it seriously, kind of thing. And at some point, I think Jordan and I both knew, but right around end of sophomore year, I asked Jordan, I was like, like this is we talked about all the values of setting goals, of overcoming, challenges, being a good athlete. These are all good virtues. Don't get, I think
Right.
striving for excellence, let's to be honest, because I think sometimes we're cautioning here in this tone, but there's a lot of great with travel stories. I love sports, right? I love the storylines of sports and what it teaches and the pinnacles of sport it teach. I think it represents a lot of things. But anyway, I was with Jordan and we're having this honest conversation. And I said, Jordan, what do you want to do next year? Right? Because we were just coming off not a great club season. And he goes, Papa, I'm going to think about it, but I think I'm going to step down and just do track and concentrate on academics. And he told me that in the car. It was just me and him. And I tried my best all of his life to, even though I imputed a lot of things, at times I'm like, Jordan, you got to do better, this, that. And I mean, I was that voice. But I always thought in my mind, it was always about Jordan, right? Always about Jordan, not about me, right? That's how most parents think. But when Jordan told me that, my heart felt something I didn't know I would feel because it was the years of driving together and the
Right.
talks and all the things that we did
Mm.
together, that we shared together. When he was a little kid and he didn't know what he wanted, I was the one who's inspiring him for certain things. And it's this dynamic and dance that we invest into.
Mm.
And when I was at Tech, I'm a business major and I didn't learn much. I'm sorry, but there was this thing that I learned that was valuable to me. It's called sunk cost fallacy, or sunk cost. And it's just that when we invest so much, we we have we inclination is always to think that there needs to be something in return. I think
Mm.
we don't think about that a lot. We don't, and that manifests itself sometimes in ways that are not healthy. I would say so. That's that. I bring that up because I think that's something as parents we should think about. Right,
Mm.
the level of involvement and investment. First of all, reveals a lot about your heart, right? In comparison to,
Mm.
but also what are the implications of that, right?
Mm.
And
Mm.
but you know what? Just to close that story up, Jordan goes, Abba, I had some good years and bad years, but I'm at peace. I had a good time. And when he said that, it wrapped everything up for me.
Mm.
Like I just had a great peace. I was like, okay, because what's the end goal, right?
Mm.
What's the end goal in all this anyway? And so that's my little story. But it was more me. I didn't realize I would even feel that until he said that, right?
Mm.
And so there's definitely something that we need to evaluate about ourselves because it's a huge involvement of the parent.
Mm. I think what's interesting is me as a third party not being involved in travel sports. I just think, oh, your kid's just going to play sports, right? And you just drive them, come back. But I think the way that you guys are describing it as a culture, emotional attachment, and the grind, it sounds to me like a lot more than what it sounds like on paper, what it looks like on paper.
Think of your CG experience times 10.
Wow.
Wow.
That's how tight knit the community becomes. You're fully invested in each other.
Mm.
You're cheering each other on every week, right? Supporting each other, driving other kids, right? Because maybe the parent can't make it, and you're sacrificing for each other every week, right? A thought came to mind as Elder Wooj was sharing. I think one thing I want to add. I get when he says that it was all about Jordan. I understand what he's saying because for me, in the same way, I had to make sure it was going to be Caleb's decision to move forward, and I didn't want to force him to do this or that, but at the same time, I don't want parents to think that we are called to be, child centric in an unhealthy manner, meaning Honestly, the reason why most parents get into travel sports and also want to keep on supporting travel sports because their kids, they see their kids having fun, right,
Mm.
and having enjoying some success, right, and they don't want their kids to be left out. And honestly, most families, they simply want their boys to have something to do in high school, right, and not not get distracted by drugs or girls or that. They want them to be part of a community. So they adopt this incredibly child-centered mentality.
Mm.
But as Christians, we ought to know better, right? And it's like
Mm.
when Caleb really wanted to play in a Sunday tournament when he was younger, I had to make it very clear. I had to draw the line for him, saying, "No, that's
Mm.
not who we are, right? We prioritize God first,
Mm.
right? It's not ultimately about what you want. It's how we're to
Mm.
honor God as a Christian
Mm.
family." And so I just wanted to kind of reframe things for the sake of our parents who are thinking through this.
Mm.
That yes, there is an aspect of not wanting to force our children in either direction, but also in the larger scheme of things, our priority and commitment is to honor God above anyone else, right?
Mm. Mm.
So yeah, there's that.
Yeah. And so I think you mentioned this again. Sunday keeps coming up, right? And we have to talk about it because some parents or some families might not have grown up in an environment, or they may just not be aware of the importance of Sunday, right? We keep talking about Sunday worship, but why is it so important for us to prioritize worship on Sunday as believers? I know this is kind of like theology 101, but perhaps it'd be helpful to clarify for our listeners why we are so focused on talking about Sunday worship, especially when it comes to things like travel sports. Obviously, there are other areas, even when we travel, take vacations, right? We've talked about Sunday worship before, but why is it so important and central to our rhythm and our lives as believers?
Want to first share from the elder's perspective?
And I think you should go first. You can. I don't
PE
know the
versus RE.
I don't know the theological
Send this back and
technical.
forth.
Well, the idea of Sabbath is rooted in the work of God's creation. We find that in Genesis. It says that God, he created for 6 days, he rested on the seventh, and the Sabbath, therefore, is considered to be a creation ordinance. And you could think of it as God, he built this Sabbath pattern or rhythm into the actual fabric of creation from the very beginning. And that principle, that rhythm or pattern is meant to be upheld and honored by all of his creation.
Mm.
So it's interesting, if you read through scripture, not only are people called to honor the Sabbath or keep the Sabbath, depending on what translation, even land, right? Even land, you're supposed to rest land, right? And so that might sound strange to people, but that's, again, the Sabbath principle working itself out in all the creation. And I think that was intentional. And just a few verses I'll read for us so that you can have better context. But
Wow.
so yeah, after God mentions in Genesis, I guess through Moses, what he did in creation, resting on the seventh. That the idea of Sabbath keeping, it comes up in Exodus 20, where God lays down the law. And so in some way he's taking what he's embedded in creation and codifying it, right, through the law. And Exodus 20 is the famous chapter where Moses comes down from the mountain and finds people worshiping a golden calf. And then the commandments are given. And what's interesting is that in Exodus 20, God gives us one reason for the fourth commandment, and then later in Deuteronomy 5, there's a slightly different reason given, right? The two don't contradict each other, but I believe, complement one another. In Exodus 20, it's emphasis is placed more upon rest, right? Whereas in Deuteronomy 5, emphasis is placed on, hey, God delivered you out of slavery. And so this element of, therefore, there's got to be an element of worship in the way you keep keep the Sabbath. And so I think for that reason, people have always understood the substance of the Sabbath to be both rest and worship,
Mm.
right? Not just rest,
Mm.
but also worship. I'll quote Kevin DeYoung here. The twin engines of the Sabbath are worship and rest. We rest so that we might be free to worship God, and we give God worship in part by trusting Him enough to rest,
Mm.
right? And I think it's a helpful way to look at it.
Mm. Mm. So this is an important aspect because oftentimes travel sports demand that you take time out of your Sunday, and oftentimes conflicts with our Sunday worship, which prohibits us from doing the resting and the worship that.
Yeah, I think practically speaking, put it this way, I've said this before from the pulpit, but it doesn't matter how much you say as a parent to your children. I love God, I treasure Him, I value Him, while every Sunday you're not present in worship, right? And you neglect God's people and the community that He's placed you in. In the meantime, you're investing all your time, all your money, all your energy into travel sports, right? The kid's not going to be convinced with your words. He or she's going to look at your actions and say, oh, I guess mom and dad actually worships, quote unquote, sports instead, or me, right? So I can do whatever I want, basically, right?
Well, I think part of the Sabbath discussion is, we're taking this for granted, but as Christians, our highest aim, right? Like our highest aim, and if this filters down to our highest, then therefore our highest aim in discipling our children is to know God, to enjoy God, and to worship God. Like, I know these, intellectually speaking, this is kind of known, but we have to really ask ourselves in how we are present on the Sabbath day, and in how we attend church. Like, is that our heart's cry? Like above all things, like God really deserves this worship, and it is a joy and a privilege to walk through these church doors. And when you exude that, especially as I would say, as the dad, as the head of the household, exactly what Pastor Paul, my reflections of having teenagers is that you can say a lot. I'd like to think I can put some words together that, sound great, but actually the kids will judge your actions far more. And that's actually they're going to remember that more too. And so this aspect of coming to church, God gave us the Sabbath so that it's a grace among this life filled with idols and temptations. Sunday is where we can preserve our hearts to remember, God, you are above all things. You are worthy of my praise. And not only that, when I do that, blessing overflows in my life. And so then to filter that down to our children, what is our highest aim as Christian parents for our children? Is for them to know God and walk faithfully with God, no matter what other paths they have, athlete, non-athlete, successful, non-athlete, rich, poor. It is the most central point is having God. And I think, how you wrestle with the Sunday question, I actually don't even know if I have specific guardrails that I can share, but I know that guiding principle, we'll call it the North Star, or one other brother was talking to me about discipleship and shared this illustration of the trellis. It's what guides the vines, right? It could be a trellis that's like a rod, or it could be wide, right? Meaning like it can go this way, but it goes always towards intentional direction, upwards. And that's our job. That's our job as dads, to make sure that we know where that trellis is headed, what the North Star is. And I think if that really is in our hearts, then we will wrestle with that question of Sunday, hopefully in a way that honors God. All right. I'd like to think our church is not overly strict and dogmatic, at least, but it is meant to be not taken lightly. I think if we are really showing with our example that we, like Pastor Paul said, we value, I mean, you say that, but you value how I play on Sundays more than how I mature in the Lord, I think the kids will know that, and at the end of the day, when God calls us to account for as disciplers of our children, like that's something you should take weightily, I do as a dad. So I think that's how I reason through it, because I don't have the specifics, but I think that is important to think about. What is the end goal of both ourselves and for our children? I think that's kind of my North Star.
So I think for our listeners, just to kind of sum up what's being said here, given the biblical foundations and the importance of Sabbath day as rest and worship, Sunday service, corporate worship, is a non-negotiable in the lives of believers, right? That's essentially what's being said here, right? And I have to kind of make that clear because oftentimes it's
Yeah, uh, I'll expose my cards fully on the table. Okay.
all right. Let's
Since you brought it up,
yeah.
right? I think if you go by the Westminster Confession of Faith,
Mhm.
and the standards that the PCA, also the OPC, subscribe to
Mhm.
in general, because there are exceptions that people take, you would be led to embrace a strict Sabbatarian view, right? And I don't know if we have time to get into all the details of the
Mhm.
standards, but essentially, uh, it would lead you to say that any form of recreation, anything,
Mm.
would be inappropriate on Sunday, okay, on the Christian Sabbath.
Mm.
And I am not one to call myself a strict Sabbatarian. Uh, that's why earlier I said there's some tension in my heart.
Mm.
I think I'm not that I think I currently more nuanced. I tend to lean more toward the Calvin's what Calvin upheld, and uh, I think he looked at the Sabbath principle, and he argued that there's some element that is moral, that is meant to be upheld
Mhm.
in this life, but also some element of it is ceremonial
Mm.
and was meant to be abolished. And so I think I'm somewhere in that camp, I would
Mm.
say. And so, is Sunday worship non-negotiable? Well, if we go by the strict Sabbath principle, we should be worshiping on Saturday. Now, Christians at some point, due to the resurrection of Jesus, they shifted the original Jewish Sabbath to one day to the Christian
Mhm.
Sabbath on Sunday. Uh, I personally, I think it's really not a matter of what day, but it's the rhythm and pattern that God has established in creation
Mm.
that's more important. So this rhythm of work and rest,
Mm.
one day a week.
Mm.
I think that much is, in my mind, the moral principle that
Mhm.
we need to embrace and uphold in life,
Yeah.
and not so much, this hour, this time, this
Mhm.
location. I think if you commit yourself to a church community, and if your church leaders, they call the church family to worship on a particular day, then that's when you should primarily worship,
Mm.
right? I think that's a practical wisdom
Mm.
that you need to uh, live out,
Mm.
and so that's where I fall right now. Yeah.
Right. So
So yeah, to push this a little further, if Cornerstone ever began a Saturday evening worship, would I be okay with Christians coming and worshiping that day?
uh-huh.
I think our elders would currently have a problem with that, so I'm not going to, push the envelope there. But in principle, would I have a problem with it? Not really. Okay. Now, do I prefer that the church just have one service, and that we don't have this divided services that essentially
Mhm.
divide the church? Yes, I prefer one service, but
Mm.
I'm saying in principle, whether it's Saturday evening or Sunday morning, Sunday evening, even Monday, whatever. Because honestly, we always say as pastors, our Sabbath is when Monday.
Mm.
So what are we saying essentially, right?
Mm. Mm. So a couple things there from what you said. I think worship is
Yeah,
non-negotiable,
worship is non-negotiable.
but
Rest
recreation,
is rest ought to be considered non-negotiable as well. Worship and rest, they go together.
right? But you would be open, and you are open to recreation being part of the aspect of rest. Is that an apt way of putting your view here? Because you're essentially saying you're okay with Christians, Cornerstone members, uh, engaging in other activities that are not necessarily corporate worship or scripture praying,
Yeah,
like even watching
I
football,
think
right?
I think I have a problem. I can't right now in good conscience regulate uh, what people would consider worship, what people consider recreation,
Mm.
how to draw exactly the line there,
Sure,
right?
sure.
Is throwing a football around with your kid considered, a violation of the Sabbath? That's where it gets very
Mm.
tricky for me,
Mm.
right?
Mm. Mm.
But I guess what I'm saying is, simply put, I don't think Christians should ever compromise the pattern of worship and
Right,
rest throughout their lives.
right, right. Any thoughts on that, Wish?
No, no, that's helpful to me as I think through how I am to observe the Sabbath as well. But
Mm. Yeah, and we say this because once again, our confessions and even our directory for worship sort of pushes us in a more strict Sabbatarian direction. If we take it for what it is, in fact, PCA directory for worship encourages morning and evening worship service, which I know some churches do that, and I know Kevin DeYoung himself is a
Yeah,
proponent
yeah. God
of
bless him.
he's a proponent of what?
morning and worship,
Oh wow, okay.
morning and evening worship.
Hmm.
And so the point here, though, is that worship on Sunday or the Sabbath day is a non negotiable. And the problem is oftentimes we treat it as a negotiable thing. And we end up being very inconsistent in our
Mm.
attendance of Sunday worship for various reasons, including travel sports. But I think it's important to kind of establish that what we're saying here is Sunday worship, non negotiable. And so, even when it comes to travel sports, what you guys are saying is we have to consider Sunday worship to be the central the thing that we do on Sundays and plan around it. Is that what's being implied here? Right? Practically speaking, what does that look like?
Yeah, you should. You don't plan your life around travel sports, right? You plan your life around Sunday worship, in our case, and around your commitment to your church family, and that should be the hub. Right? That should be your non-negotiable, and then you try to find ways to fit in other things that are lesser priorities,
Mm.
right? But the reality nowadays is that it's the other way around. Your travel sports is priority, and then we can't go to Sunday worship because of travel sports.
Mm.
It's not we can't go to travel sports because of Sunday worship,
Mm.
right? For most parents, it's we can't make it to Sunday because tournament, right?
Mm.
And so that reveals their priorities.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
backwards.
Mm. So how would you advise parents who have children who are very perhaps they are gifted and they enjoy playing in the more competitive leagues, and yet a lot of the games do fall on Sundays, but like you guys were saying, they don't want to downgrade to a weaker league. So are there any practical wisdom that you guys can provide in terms of balancing both competition but also
Yeah,
observing
your
Sunday?
kids gonna, if they're really gifted, as you say they are, they're gonna be fine missing, a few games on a Sunday morning or a Sunday afternoon, right? If they're truly gifted, right? It's not gonna damage their future if you have any real ambitions to go pro, or even play college sports. In fact, games at a young age, they're actually overrated.
Mm.
If you really want to develop, then you should spend more time in the gym during the week, and grind it out there, and develop your skills and your strength. But I would encourage parents to find a team that is more accommodating. In my case, it was SYA, and then it was FCA. So we compromised on talent. FCA is Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Their team was actually worse, and so Caleb actually played up a year. He played with older kids, but even that was, they were bad too, and so we we ended up going to a different organization. So you gotta find the team that would be willing to accommodate and be okay with you missing a Sunday here or or there. Um, and just making sure, like, whatever you do, I think a good gauge would be asking yourself every year, are my kids actually growing in their faith?
Mm.
Like, are they loving the Lord, right?
Mhm.
More after this year, or are they loving the Lord less, and are they just being preoccupied with sports,
Mm.
right? And so that should be a good sort of litmus test.
Mm. Mm. Any thoughts on that, Elder
No,
Wooj?
I think those are good practical applications. Like getting on the front end of discussing both with your spouse what the kind of the plan's going to be based on the team that you work with. Like Pastor Paul said, doing your research to find a more these are all practical outlets of your desire to prioritize worship for your family. So I don't know if I have too much more to add. And I know this is more of a personal, just like sharing but as I have now, and Pastor Paul's, probably know, his experience this was as I have my oldest leaving me soon. I think I'm sure there could have been tons of other scenarios where I would have felt differently. But honestly, you know, for me, my heart has been lately just more on, yeah, exactly thinking about is Jordan uh, leaving my house where he has a foundation, like a fertile heart to grow in the Lord, right?
Mm.
And I don't know, I know it's gonna sound kind of, I don't know what the right way to put it is, but that's of greater concern to me than I think any I don't know, athletic success that he could have had. So I mean, I think for me, it's just going back to that point of I'm reflecting back because he's kind of near the end of
Mm.
leaving my house in a sense. But when you are at that point, what is the end goal that you want to cultivate in your kid's heart? Because the time that they do spend under your household is not as long as you would think. So I think getting that right on the front end, rather than just diving into this and then looking back and wondering, what did we invest in these 18 years that he was here? I think
Mm.
it's just worthwhile discussing and thinking too. I don't know if that's helpful, but
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, I would simply say also make the Lord's Day or our worship that we do on Sunday a non-negotiable for you. I would also encourage families to cap the amount of money they're going to be spending in a given season on sports, and I would really encourage also not 2, 3 sports at a time in a given
Mm.
season, but I'm not against multiple sports, but even one sport doing it well, it's a big time commitment.
Mm.
One sport in a given season with some, a defined off season, I think is healthier for kids instead of having them just constantly be on the go, 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 and just, pressure to perform all throughout the year. I'm not sure if that's very healthy for a young mind and
Mm.
heart.
Mm. Mm. All this is very helpful for me, and I'm sure many of our listeners as well as they anticipate this life stage coming. And even for parents who already have children in travel sports, I hope that they find this helpful to reevaluate perhaps the priority and what exactly is the legacy we're trying to leave to our children at the end of the day. I think what you guys shared is very helpful. And so thank you for your insight and your wisdom. And I think that about wraps it up for this episode. As we come to the end of this episode of Living Stones, we hope that you found our discussion on travel sports and Sunday worship insightful and also helpful. If you found value in today's episode, we encourage you to share it with others. Remember that you are not alone in this journey. We are members of God's household, united by our shared faith in the Lord and the desire to grow together. So until next time, may God's grace and peace be with you all. Thank you for being a part of Living Stones.